Imagine you're playing your favorite video game and you need to follow the rules to get rewards. It's like getting a paycheck at the end of the day. But just like in real life, some people don't want to play by the rules. They refuse to join teams or work together, and sometimes they even get kicked out for being troublemakers. These players ended up living in the bad part of town, called the Town of Beginnings. They turned to a life of crime, doing whatever it took to survive. Inside the town it was safe, the game wouldn't let players hurt each other. But outside, anything goes. There were no rules, and some players took advantage of that. A group of outcasts called vagabonds teamed up with each other. They avoided fighting monsters because it was too hard. Instead, they targeted unsuspecting players who were just trying to have fun. It's like they thought, why bother with tough monsters when we can pick on easier targets? And for the first year they didn't even sink as low as killing other players. But who knows what would happen next? Imagine a huge team of players working together to conquer a game. This team grew and grew until it had around 1,000 members. But not everyone wanted to be part of one big group. Some players wanted to do their own thing. About 500 players formed smaller groups called guilds. There were around 50 of these guilds, and they were super helpful in the game. They were like quick and nimble superheroes, using their resources to get things done faster than the bigger groups could. Then there was a small group of players who didn't want to fight at all. These crafters and traders formed their own guilds, focusing on skills that would help them make money without battling monsters. There were only about 200-300 of these players, but they were really good at what they did. Lastly, there were the solo players like me. We were a small group of adventurers who liked to play the game on our own, without joining any big groups or guilds. We were like lone wolves, exploring the game and making our own way. Imagine being part of a massive online game, but instead of joining a team you decide to fly solo. That's exactly what we did, group of individual players who chose to go it alone. Most of us were veterans of the game's beta testing phase, so we had a head start when the game officially launched. We used our experience to blast through the early levels, and before long we were strong enough to take on monsters and bad guys by ourselves. One reason it was easy to be a solo player was that the game called SAO didn't have magic spells that could attack from far away. This meant that even when we faced groups of enemies, we could usually handle them on our own, without needing help from others. It was a game that rewarded players who were brave or crazy enough to go it alone, and that's exactly what we did. Imagine being a superhero in a virtual world. If you're really good at playing alone, you can level up way faster than if you were part of a team. But there's a catch: it's also way riskier. For example, if you get paralyzed while playing with friends, someone can just heal you, and you're good as new. But if you're playing solo and that happens, it could be game over for your character. A lot of solo players didn't make it because they took too many risks. However, if you know what you're doing and can avoid danger, the rewards are totally worth it. Luckily, our group of beta testers had a head start on everyone else. We knew the secrets to staying safe and getting ahead. As we solo players zoomed past the newbies, some of them started to get pretty frustrated with us. Eventually things calmed down and all the solo players moved on to explore higher level towns. One really cool place was inside Black Iron Palace, where there's a special room called the Chamber of Resurrection. It sounds like an amazing adventure waiting to happen. Imagine walking into a virtual world and seeing a huge metal monument with 10,000 names on it, including yours. This epic epitaph was created after a big test of the game. When someone's character dies, their name gets crossed out on the monument, along with the time and reason they died. It didn't take long for someone to become the first casualty. But here's the surprising part. It wasn't a monster that killed them. The player actually chose to end their own life in the game. They believed that if they just logged out of the game, they would wake up back in the real world, no problem. This was because of how the special headset called Nerve Gear worked. But was this theory right? Only time would tell. Imagine standing on the edge of a huge tower that seems to float in the air. That's where this guy was, Mana Terrace, at the very edge of Aincrad, a massive virtual world. He climbed over the railing and jumped off. The crowd watching gasped as he fell screaming into thin air. If you looked down from up there, all you'd see is sky and clouds stretching out forever. No ground, no buildings, just empty space. The man's scream got fainter and fainter until he vanished into the clouds. It was like he never existed. Back on the terrace, people waited anxiously to see what would happen next. 2 minutes passed, and then it was official. The man's name was crossed off a big monument. The reason: he fell from a great height. It was a sad and shocking end to his adventure in Aincrad. Let's not think about what happened to him when he fell. Did he wake up in the real world, or did his brain get damaged, like Kadokawa said? We just can't know for sure while we're still trapped in the game. But if it were easy to escape, wouldn't we all be free by now? Some players still believe that escaping is simple, but most of us know better. The problem is, it's hard to think about death in SAO as something real. When your character dies, it just looks like a video game, your body breaks into pieces like a bunch of polygons, and it feels like you can just restart. It's a familiar feeling for anyone who's ever played games before. But the truth is, death in SAO is permanent. And that's a really tough concept to wrap your head around. Even now, it's still hard to accept. Imagine being trapped in a virtual game where death is real. To truly get it, you have to experience it for yourself. I think one reason why many players stopped playing was that they didn't feel like their lives were really on the line. At first, many players just hung out in the town of beginnings, waiting for someone else to take action. But when they finally started exploring the game and fighting monsters, things got real. People began to die. To survive in SAO, you need experience and quick thinking. The good news is that you don't have to do everything on your own. The game has a system that helps you out. For example, let's say you want to throw a simple punch upwards with your sword. If you've learned how to use a one-handed sword, and you have the upward slice move equipped, all you need to do is make the right motion, and the game will take care of the rest. Your character will automatically swing their sword in a cool, powerful arc. It's like having a built-in coach that helps you win battles. Imagine trying to fight in a game without knowing the right moves. It's like trying to dance without learning the steps. You'll just look silly, and won't get very far. In the virtual world of SAO, combat was kind of like playing a fighting game. You had to know how to string together cool combos to take down enemies. If you didn't know what you were doing, you'd just flail around with your sword, struggling to beat even the weakest creatures. It was pretty embarrassing. But here's the thing, in most games, if things get tough, you can just quit or run away. You won't die in real life. So who cares? In SAO it was different. The game was so realistic that it felt super scary to play. When your character's health started to run out and things got hairy, you might want to retreat and live to fight another day. But the problem was, the game felt so real that it triggered a deep down fear in players. It wasn't just a game that felt like your life was on the line. Imagine being in a world where monsters are real and they're out to get you. In the game, SAO players faced creatures with sharp teeth that would attack and try to kill them at any moment. When people first started playing, they were shocked by how intense the battles were. But it wasn't just the fighting that was scary. It was the fact that if you lost, you could really die. Lots of players panicked when they realized this. They forgot how to defend themselves and became easy targets for the monsters. It didn't take long for people to start dying in the game. The list of dead players kept growing and growing. When someone died, a message would appear that said things like suicide or defeat in combat. These messages were like a countdown to disaster. In just 1 month, over 2,000 players had died. This was devastating for the people who were still alive. They felt like they were trapped in a nightmare and didn't know how to escape. The game had become a place of darkness and fear, where death lurked around every corner. Imagine if things kept going the way they would have all been gone in just 6 months. It seemed crazy to think we could ever make it through all 100 floors of Aincrad. But here's the thing, humans are super good at learning and getting better. After a month of trying, we finally beat the first floor. And then something amazing happened. It only took us 10 days to conquer the second floor. As people shared tips on how to survive, the number of deaths started to drop big time. We realized that if we kept leveling up and gaining experience, those scary monsters weren't so tough after all. A glimmer of hope appeared. Maybe, just maybe, we could actually win this game and return to the real world. The thought was exciting and a little terrifying at the same time. Could we really do it? The spark of hope was back. After 2 long years, we were finally moving forward again. Our goal was still super far away. We had to climb all the way to the top floor of Aincrad. But we were determined to make it happen. There were 26 floors left to beat, and 6,000 survivors cheering us on. I had just finished an epic battle with a giant lizard man lord on the 74th floor. It was a tough fight, but I made it out alive. As I walked back through the maze, memories of the battle flashed through my mind. But when I saw the exit up ahead, all those thoughts disappeared. I felt a huge rush of relief and excitement. I took a deep breath, letting go of all the stress and worry. Then I burst out of the corridor and into the fresh air. It was amazing. The cool breeze hit me like a wave. And I felt alive again. It was time to start fresh and keep moving forward. We had a long way to go, but we were ready for whatever came next. I stood at the edge of a spooky forest path with vines and bushes growing all around me. Behind me towered a huge maze, its giant spire reaching up towards the sky like a giant's fist. The weird thing about this game was that the dungeons were actually tall towers, not underground tunnels or caves, but they still had all the things that made dungeons so cool and scary. You'd find tougher enemies, twisting hallways, and a super powerful boss at the very end. I had already explored 80% of the 74th floor's maze. Now it was time to see what other secrets and dangers lay hidden inside. The goal was still the same: reach the top of the castle. But first I had to survive this crazy labyrinth. Here's the rewritten text. The countdown had begun. In just a few days we'd track down the boss's hideout and plan a massive raid. Even though I usually play alone, I was excited to join in on the battle action. As I stepped out of my doorway, I couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and nerves. My home base is in Algade, which is on the 50th floor of this huge virtual world called Minkrad. It's basically the biggest city around except for the town of Beginnings, but that place is totally controlled by the army now, so it's best to steer clear of it. As I walked through the field, the sun began to set, casting a dark shadow over everything. The trees in the distance caught my eye, a forest of twisted ancient oak trees that seemed to stretch up to the sky. It was getting late, and I knew I had to be careful as I made my way through this eerie landscape. Imagine being able to walk to your neighborhood in just 30 minutes. That's how long it would take me to get to the residential area on the 74th floor. From there, I could use a special teleport gate to zip over to Algade in an instant. But here's the thing, I could have used a magic item to teleport back to Algade from anywhere in Aincrad. The problem was, those items were super expensive, and only for emergencies. Since the sun wasn't completely gone yet, I decided to explore the forest instead of teleporting straight to my bed. It was pretty cool because most of each floor in Aincrad was wide open to the sky, except for a few strong buildings that held everything up. This made for some amazing views and adventures. As the sun began to set, its rays peeked through the trees and made them glow like embers. A spooky mist crept through the branches, sparkling in the fading light. The loud bird chirp started to fade away, and the rustling of leaves sounded louder than ever. I knew I could handle any creatures that came my way, even if I was half asleep, but as the darkness fell, a shiver ran down my spine. It felt like being a little kid again, lost on the way home, and too scared to move. Weirdly, I didn't mind this feeling. It was a rush of fear that I hadn't felt in a long time, not since I left the real world behind. It was like a wake-up call, reminding me that I'm still alive and capable of feeling something deep inside. This primal fear was exhilarating, and I had to admit, I kind of missed it. The best part of playing an adventure game is exploring the wilderness, all by yourself, with no one else around. But my daydreaming was interrupted by a strange high-pitched sound. It was like someone blowing a whistle made from a leaf, short and loud. I froze, trying to figure out where the noise came from. In this virtual world, weird sights and sounds can mean either good luck or bad news. As a solo player, I've worked hard to improve my search skill. This super useful tool helps me avoid surprise attacks and spot hidden enemies, or other players who think they're sneaky. The better I get at searching, the more likely I am to stay safe. As I looked around, a monster emerged from the shadows of a huge tree about 10 yards away. But it wasn't as scary as I thought. It was actually pretty small. Its gray-green fur helped it blend in with the leaves, and its super long ears were even longer than its body. I focused my eyes on the creature, and suddenly a yellow cursor appeared, along with the monster's name. My heart skipped a beat when I saw what it said. Raygout rabbit. I had never seen one before. They're ultra rare. These cute fluffy critters live in trees, and aren't exactly known for being strong, or giving you lots of experience points. But still, I was excited to have spotted one. I had a secret plan to take down the super fast Raygout rabbit. I quietly pulled out a thin throwing pick from my belt. My throwing knife skills weren't my strongest, and I wasn't super good at it either. But I knew this rabbit was crazy fast, faster than any other monster we'd ever seen. I doubted I could get close enough to use my regular sword. Luckily the rabbit hadn't spotted me yet, so I had a chance to make the first move. I gripped the pick in my right hand and said a silent, "Please work." I got ready to throw it using my basic single-shot skill, even though I wasn't a pro at throwing knives. My super high agility score would help me hit my target. Fingers crossed. I swung my pick with lightning speed, and it vanished into the dark branches. For a split second, it left behind a glowing trail. As soon as I used my special move, the target cursor turned bright red, and a health bar appeared under the rabbit. The rabbit let out a super high-pitched shriek as the pick hit its mark. Its health bar dropped to 0 in an instant. I heard the cool sound effect of the rabbit disappearing into thin air, and I pumped my fist in excitement. I quickly opened my menu and switched to my inventory. My fingers stumbled over the controls for a second, but then I saw it. Ragout rabbit meat was right at the top of my new items list. I couldn't believe it. This rare meat was worth a ton of money, at least 6 figures on the market. It was like striking gold. Imagine having enough money to buy the coolest one-of-a-kind weapons in the game, with plenty left over. It was a dream come true, all thanks to a special ingredient I had found. This ingredient was super rare, and had the highest flavor rating in the entire game. In the world of SAO, food was one of the few things that brought us joy. Most of the food was pretty basic, think simple bread and soup, like something from an old European village. But some players, called crafters, had a special skill that let them cook more interesting meals. The problem was there weren't many of these cooks around, and it was really tough to find good ingredients. As a result, most players were always on the lookout for better food. And I was one of them. I was tired of eating the same old boring stuff all the time. I sat at my favorite restaurant in the game, munching on some okay soup and black bread. But let's be real, my taste buds were screaming for something way better, big, juicy piece of meat. I spotted it on the menu and my eyes widened. It was super rare and I might never find another one like it again. I really wanted to devour it, but there was a catch. Only a super skilled chef could cook it just right. I knew someone who could do the job, but finding them would be a total hassle. Plus, I really needed some new armor. So I decided to sell the meat for some cold hard cash instead. It was tough to resist the temptation, but I finally closed the menu and made up my mind. Saying no to that delicious meat was one of the hardest things I'd done all day. I used my search skill to check out the area around me. It was unlikely that any sneaky players would be lurking in this super dangerous place, looking for an easy target. But when you've got something as valuable as I did, it's always better to be safe than sorry. I reached into the pouch on my waist, and started digging around for a special teleportation crystal. This crystal would let me travel instantly back to ASCII, a town where I could sell the rare meat I had found and make a fortune. With all that money, I figured I could buy as many of these crystals as I wanted. The crystal I pulled out was really cool. It was long and skinny, with 8 sides and sparkled a deep blue color. In the world of SAO, magic didn't work like it did in other games. Instead, special items like this crystal held all the magic power. It was one of the few ways to get a little extra help in this tough virtual world. Let's talk about these cool fragments. The blue ones were for teleporting to a different place, the pink ones for healing when you're hurt, and the green ones for curing poison, if you've been poisoned. They worked super fast. But they were really expensive, so it made more sense to just run away from a fight, and use a cheaper potion, if you needed to get your health back. But I was in a big emergency, so I decided to use one of the blue fragments. I held it tight, and yelled, "Teleport. ASCII." Suddenly I heard a beautiful sound like a bunch of bells ringing at the same time. The little crystal broke into pieces in my hand, and a bright blue light covered my whole body. The forest around me started to disappear, and all I could see was the light. It got even brighter for a second, and then boof. It was gone. When the light disappeared, I found myself in a completely new place. It was like magic. Imagine walking into a city where the sound of leaves crunching under your feet is replaced with a loud clang of hammers, and the chatter of tons of people. That's what it was like when I arrived at the teleport gate in the heart of ASCII. This huge metal gate stood out in the city square, towering above everything else, at an impressive 16 feet tall. As people walked through the shimmering interior, they disappeared and reappeared in other cities all over Aincrad. The city square was surrounded by 4 big streets lined with tiny shops selling all sorts of cool stuff. If you were hungry or thirsty after a long day of exploring, you could grab some food from a cart or hang out at a pub and listen to the lively conversations. But let's be real, Algate was a pretty crazy place. It wasn't like other cities with big fancy buildings. Instead, it was a maze of narrow alleys, weird workshops selling mysterious items, and sketchy taverns that might not let you leave once you went in. People didn't just say that Algate was confusing, they had real horror stories about getting lost in its winding alleys, for days on end. It was like the city was designed to trap you. So if you ever found yourself in Algate, make sure to bring a map or a really good sense of direction. I'd been living in this crazy city, Algate, for almost a year, but I still got lost all the time. The streets were like a puzzle, and even the computer-controlled characters didn't behave like they should. Humans who spent too much time here started to act a little weird too. But despite all the craziness, I loved it here. My favorite thing to do was sip strange-tasting tea in a hidden alley cafe. It was my one peaceful moment each day. I think part of why I liked Algate so much was that it reminded me of an electronics market I used to visit in real life. Anyway, I had some business to take care of before heading back to my secret hideout, so I set out to find a merchant who sold the gear I needed. It was time to get shopping. I navigated through the packed Western Boulevard for what felt like forever, until I finally arrived at my destination, a quirky little shop. As soon as I stepped inside, I knew it was run by a player, just like me. The place was super cramped, with barely enough room for 5 people to squeeze in. Everywhere I looked, there were piles of stuff. Swords, tools, food, and all sorts of other gear. The owner was right out front, negotiating a deal with someone. It was clear that this shop was the real deal. But have you ever wondered how to get rid of your old stuff in the game? Well, there are 2 main ways to sell your items. You can sell them to an NPC, that's just a fancy way of saying the computer. This way is safe and easy. You won't get cheated out of your money. However, you'll only get a set price for your goods, and it's usually lower than what other players would pay. The other option is to sell your items directly to another player. This way can be a bit riskier, but it's also more exciting. You get to negotiate the price and try to get the best deal possible. It's like haggling at a real market. Which method do you think is better? Want to get a great price for the stuff you're selling? It's not always easy. First, you have to find someone who wants to buy it. Then you have to deal with buyers who can be super picky, or even try to scam you. Some people might buy something, and then come back wanting their money back. That's where traders come in. They make a living by buying and selling second-hand items. But that's not the only reason they're around. Traders, like crafters, need special skills to do their job. They have to be good at things like negotiating prices and finding great deals, and just like crafters, they have to venture out into the wilderness to get what they need. Imagine you're a trader or a crafter. You need items to sell or ingredients to make new things. To get those items, you might have to fight monsters and collect their treasure. It's not always easy, but it's all part of the job.